One of the most compelling parts of the whole doc, although it's like vomit-inducing as well, is the whole debacle that went off over at Yale,
right.
And you'll correct a lot of this, but something went out naturally around Halloween that says, please wear appropriate attire. You can't be Pocahontas if you're not American Indian or something.
No sombreros.
Which, by the way, kind of defeats the purpose of Halloween,
Indeed.
which is you dressing up as something else or something other than you or your culture. And I think historically, whether you're going as an Indian or a bandito or whatever it is, as I famously went as Mr. T one year, not as a slight to the community or the individual, but as more of an homage.
A tribute.
Yeah,
a tribute.
You went full T.
I shaved my head.
And
I went blackface. I went as Mr. T because that's what Mr. T looks like. And I liked Mr. T, which is no different than your favorite Star Wars character. If you like that Star Wars character, I happen to like Mr. T. But for some reason, they had to put the memo out that said, be careful here. And then
Cultural appropriation, they called it, right?
Appropriation.
Right. And then I believe another faculty member said, oh, look, let's not go nuts here, everybody. And then her husband came out to defend her. And the next thing you know, he was being surrounded in the quad.
Right. Well, it's actually more than that. I don't talk about this in the documentary, but Erica Christakis' specific academic expertise is in the development of adolescent and kind of early 20s psychology. And her big part of research is that it's extremely important that you allow 14, 15, 16, 17, 19-year-olds to work out these moral boundaries on their own. Like that process in and of itself is an extremely educational one. And when the bureaucracy, sort of the administrative overlords at Yale University, step inside of that process, they deny undergraduates an opportunity for education. And then as I talk about in the documentary, she's not exactly met with civil criticism.
No, and
it's a good example of why you can't argue with a mob.
It's basically a mob shows up at their residence, and then the husband, who, boy, you want to talk about credentials in terms of his own family, the work he's done, the diverse community he's worked with, his immediate family, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
Hey, goes out and tries to just talk a little calm sense into
and it goes
everybody.
great, and that's the end of the movie.
That's the end of the movie.
Everybody lives happily ever after.
It's unthinkable to me that some 19-year-old would get in his grill and go, look me in the eye, look at my face. And it's like, this is a 19-year-old. This guy's a tenured professor. What are you doing? You're not allowed to do this. When did that become okay?
Well, he's not just trying. He doesn't just engage with them. He does what the core function of a university is supposed to be, where he's making them grapple with the complexities of the issue. Right?
He made one girl cry.
It was more than just cry. And again, the whole idea for him is he's also someone who's basically like a lifelong Democrat, has liberal political dispositions, has spent large portions of his life attempting to help healthcare in the developing world. He's not some conservative reactionary. And what he's trying to get the students to recognize is that it's a very difficult sort of gray line between outright racist costumes and something that is just supposed to be provocative in ways that are useful. And so in the course of trying to discharge the core function of the universities, he gets an avalanche of lazy accusations of racism and then a bunch of hysterics. That's what it is. And then he ends up having to step down, and his wife ends up having to leave the university entirely. And then the real thing, and this is
This is over a letter about Halloween. And these people are as lefty, liberal, go to Guatemala and roll your sleeves up and dig a well as anybody, and they're forced to leave. It's
not just that. The university also cuts a huge check for a relatively small group of student activists. There's sort of this new rage within elite academies. It happened at Brown's, happening at Yale, happening at a lot of other schools, is to cut $50 to $100 million checks for inclusivity programs. Wow. The specific contents of which are never specified.
It just looks better as a headline.
Right. And so the thing about the Yale doc is supposed to, a relatively small slice of students at an elite school like Yale are actually sympathetic to what happened in that courtyard, the really cancerous, kind of censorious behavior. But the mystery then is, why is it that such a small slice of students are able to wield such a huge amount of power, right? That they're able to get the university to bend to their will.
Was there I'm sorry if you discussed this and I haven't seen it, but is there an example that you can go to and say, this is the turning point? This is when it happened? Or is it just such a slow burn?
Well, thank you for mentioning that. I actually think that it's the opening incident in Silent U Part 1. So the one where I go back to my university because it kind of that really formative experience that I had it no longer appears to be possible. And the first anecdote is what happened in 2013, which is when the New York Police Commissioner Ray Kelly came to Brown University and was basically shouted down. And I've talked to a lot of people that have been following this issue, and for them, they mark that specific incident as the turning point for campus culture generally. Like that's the ADBC moment. Like in 2013, just a couple years ago, is when it turns. That these schools had always been overwhelmingly liberal, but to the point where they just reject sort of the basic norms of civil discourse, that's where it turned. That's the center of the story.
Also, what you learn when you're dealing with some of these ass wipes, as I had to deal with this bitch over at NBC, these folks who are, head of diversity or diversity awareness or whatever it is, they look at themselves as the kid from the Twilight Zone who could wish people into the cornfield. They don't much care that they have Les Moonves above them or the production entity or the celebrity or the whomever the name of the shows. They look at themselves as the most powerful person on that campus, in that entity, because they can wish people into the cornfield by simply calling them racist or telling them what they can do and can't do, or what is racist or what is good taste and what is bad taste. They will decide. They'll be the arbiter
oversight
of that.
Checks and balances.
And yeah, there may be 100 people on the faculty that get paid more, and there's the dean, and there's the founders, and there's everyone else. But they're the most powerful. That's the way they look at it, and that's how they carry themselves. And when I was doing this NBC show, like a sitcom, this bitch just came up from whatever, and she was like the diversity monitor, and she just came up and started like telling us what would work, what wouldn't work, and going through our script and like putting X's through stuff, going, this is not going to do. And I was just like, who is this bitch? And why is she telling us what to do? It's like, well, she's and sure enough, all the big suits and the head of the networks and everybody was just like, she gets to tell you what we can't tell her what to do. She'll wish us into the cornfield. This is bad. This is not the way this stuff is supposed to work. Does these people have a sense, it's not of entitlement, it's a sense of power that trumps everybody. And they could just walk into an auditorium with some guy who's, 35 years on the police force or whatever, and just walk at 19 and go, shut it down. Yep. Shut it down. Everyone go home. They actually think they can do that, and they do.
Well, I would also
say, let them do it.
I would say the individual instances that make the front page of the Drudge Report are obviously repulsive. Things like what happened with Charles Murray at Middlebury or what happened with Milo at Berkeley. But there's an equal tragedy, which is just an environment of self-censure that continues to permeate these campuses even when there's no New York Times reporters around, where those instances where these students are not appropriately disciplined or combated, it sets a tone in which students don't voice heterodox opinions in the first place, right? Like you don't need to pull a column that's never written. You don't have to disinvite a speaker that's never invited. And that leads to a real intellectual homogeneity, which in turn leads to a real intellectual fragility. And that's why you see what happens in the courtyard, where just like a minor critique of the standard orthodoxy on campuses elicits tears, it elicits hysterics. And then
it's hysterics, and it's first off, it's the opposite of what you'd want in terms of preparation for life.
Right.
Of course.
Screaming at a liberal guy and tears flying out, you can't talk to me, you don't understand me, is insane. And then what you're talking about is sort of unintended consequences, which is like, you open the LA Times a week ago and it's like, arrests are down 40%. It's like, yeah, good. because cops don't feel like going out and being filmed arresting people, especially of color or of anything, and they'd rather keep their job and stay in their patrol car. And the guy who works for the school paper would rather keep his job and not be shouted down or have his place vandalized or whatever. So what happens? Well, we just stop putting ideas out there, or cops stop getting out of their car. You know, human beings are basically path of least resistance, especially when it comes to employment. And they just kind of learn, hey, just zip it. Like, the amount of people who disagree it's overwhelming, I'm sure. But on the other hand, everyone wants to keep their job, so everyone just keeps their mouth shut.